So when I was putting my slide deck together, I saw on the Philly.net website, less PowerPoint, more code. So I threw out my PowerPoint, and all I have is my README on GitHub, and everything else is in Visual Studio Code. I just closed Visual Studio Code. It's actually in here. All right, so this is everybody in the back. Can you read that? I can try to make things a little bit bigger. This is the type of stuff that we're going to cover. So if you're fully acquainted with all of these things, this might not be the session for you. The intent is people who haven't used PowerShell or have used it a little bit, know a little bit of this and that. We're going to try to solidify some of the syntax, some of the concepts, so that if you're ever stuck writing or maintaining PowerShell code, all the weird, obscure things that are hard to Google because it's some punctuation mark or subtle behavior, we'll at least cover them here so you know what's going on. Basic things are, actually, I'm not going to go through these bit by bit. You can just read through them. We'll go through them in the slides that follow. But they're not really slides. It's all Visual Studio Code, PowerShell code. And this is a PowerShell file with comments that doesn't do anything. Okay, what situations would you want to use PowerShell? You're too lazy to build a full admin app for whatever your pet project is, but you want to dump the responsibility to the DevOps team and not your app dev team. They can handle a PowerShell script to add users or spin up new servers, whatever it is. The boss is more likely to let you build a PowerShell script for your pet project rather than a full-blown app. And I've pulled this off twice. Even though it was the wrong tool for the job, if I said I'm going to build this huge C# beautiful website with all these web pages, I knew it wouldn't get approved. Hey, I'm just maintaining this PowerShell script. The boss didn't want anything to do with that. I just went ahead and built whatever I wanted. Another situation, does anybody know PowerShell and you want to look good? Yeah, if you have to do some serious operating system level stuff, processes, oh, I spelled that wrong, memory, disk space, networking, and it's kind of a one-off throwaway. This is what it was made for. More and more now, I'm seeing it AWS, Azure, Ansible. If you're doing anything with Active Directory, SharePoint admin, TFS build automation, PowerShell just keeps popping up everywhere. Several times today in the middle of demos, people would pull up a website and they click a button, and within the website, there was a PowerShell shell window, and people are typing in code to maintain their websites and their projects in real time. First thing you have to know is execution policy. Every single time I forget this. I sit down on a new machine, I try to run my PowerShell scripts, I immediately get this obscure error message that makes no sense at all. Basically, Microsoft, out of the box, locks down every machine so that it can't run PowerShell scripts unless you explicitly do it. Visual Studio Code supports PowerShell natively. I just hit the F5 button. I already did it on my machine, so when I run PowerShell, get execution, it tells me remote signed. I'm not going to go into the details now, but basically if you have remote signed or unrestricted, you can run shell scripts, you can run PS1 files successfully. If not, you're going to be stuck. All right, always have to start with the hello world, and I sprinkled in a couple things in here just to explain the syntax. F5, okay. CLS to clear the screen. All the old-fashioned DOS commands have more sophisticated big brothers in PowerShell with more sophisticated syntax. And if you use the old DOS spelling, it just does some default behavior. Comments, those are the two styles for comments. Variables always start with a $sign. Use a backtick for line continuation. The backtick is the one that's next to the number 1 button, not the one that's over by the L. This is really weird. New line and tabs, instead of /t and /n, it's backtick T and backtick N. That took I always make that mistake because I use PowerShell, switch back to other tools. I just forget that every single time. If you're writing regular expressions in PowerShell, then you have to use /t and /n. It's annoying. All right, let's get to some of the more interesting stuff. So for every slide, which is really a separate PS1 file, first I clear the screen so my output console is easier to read. The next thing I do is I just do a write host, which is outputting to the console, title of my slide. Let's define some variables. I'm separating them by semicolons, multiple commands. You'll notice the first one, test1, did not do what I wanted to because I used literal apostrophes, more forgiving quotation marks. And I slipped down the bottom some C# versions of how the code works. I have a timer to pace myself, so I'm just keeping an eye on the time here. Test 3 gets a little bit more sophisticated. I end up using this syntax over and over again within PowerShell. I just find it useful. $ parentheses, evaluate something. I can sneak that in the middle of a string. I can do multi-line strings. I didn't know about the C# on line 19. I didn't know you could do that in C#. I was about to say there's no equivalent to this within C# that also does variable expansion, but apparently there is. $@. You'll notice there's a backtick over here in front of $A. That's because I literally want to print out the $. So this is the escape character instead of a backslash, which again is very confusing to me after using regular C# and C for so long. Any questions on this? Anybody know how to make the font bigger in Visual Studio Code? Control+, Shift+? Huh, I must be doing it wrong. I don't have a mouse. Oh well, can you guys read this in the back? All right, I'll just leave it as is. Arrays are weird within PowerShell. It's just weird. There's no real parallels. Maybe they got the syntax from Perl. I don't know where that came from. So I can declare, you see on line 2, I'm declaring a blank array that I'm adding things to it. If you're watching closely, += means it makes a copy of the array because I believe PowerShell arrays are immutable. Most of the time when I'm writing PowerShell scripts, I don't really care about mutability. I'm just writing small things to spin up servers and mess with config files, so I don't care about the overhead involved with that. Starting at line 8, I can explicitly define an array. You'll notice on line 10, I can leave off the @ and it's still happy, and even on line 12, I left off the apostrophes. I don't know what PowerShell's doing. I like to do the parentheses because it makes it clear to everyone who's reading this code, hey, this is definitely an array. Contains is a keyword that says if something is found in an array or not. It returns a true or a false. So in line 14, my array 4 does in fact contain the string B. So it's going to, did that work down here? I'm going to clear this buffer because it got some junk in there from before. But yes, you are correct. I forgot to run it. When it prints an array, it just separates them by spaces. It's kind of hard to debug sometimes because you don't know what's going on. C# will doggedly show all the, if you try to print something that's not a string, it shows you these object notations. I never really know what PowerShell is going to do. So line 15 has a shortcut, ... will go from 1 to 10. Anybody who's been doing this for a long time, there's a little bit of bash, a little bit of shell, a little bit of Perl, a little bit of DOS. It's just, for something that was supposed to be a ground-up redesign, it's really a kitchen sink. Last comment I have in there is if you're stressing about lists of strings or strings of arrays or arrays of lists or anything else like that, PowerShell's probably not the right place. Unless you're explicitly calling some API, some .NET API that needs a particular type, it's best not to worry and just let PowerShell do what it wants to do. If you use some obscure object that works in C# but isn't the native PowerShell version, the next person who modifies your script is going to be confused. Hash tables are the other big one that show up a lot. In C#, I always use a dictionary because it just works better. There is a true hash table in C#. I don't think anybody uses it because it's always better to use a dictionary that you can type the way you want. I create my hash table. I'm using this syntax, which is close enough to C#. These all behave the same. This creates an empty hash table, which is almost like JavaScript. This feels more like JavaScript now and how they create their objects. The hash tables really are the same as a JavaScript object. Array was parentheses, hash table is curly braces. That's correct. I have no idea why. That's just a weird PowerShell dialect thing that is not obvious to the eyes. I'm not going to worry about this syntax right now because we're going to circle back. But you can take my word for it, that just displays a hash table to a string. We'll go through that in more detail. So here's the next syntax. Like JavaScript, you can use the dot notation, or in C# style, you can use the brackets and the quotes. And this is literally defining it right as I need it. This also is weird. Who uses equals and semicolon? I don't know about you, but I'm constantly switching between JSON and YAML and XML and regular C#. When I stare at this, it's really hard to remember to use equals and semicolons. In C#, I would do it this way, but I would never use a hash table in C#. I'd always use a dictionary. It's the same idea. I'm not too worried about types. In general, in PowerShell, even though I can explicitly define types, I don't worry about it too much because the whole point of PowerShell is here's a script to do a bunch of small things, and behind the scenes are the fun APIs or the servers or all the other .NET code. So again, the difference between a dictionary string or a dictionary string object, I just rather let PowerShell do what it wants to do and not sweat those details too much unless I'm calling an explicit API somewhere.
Is there explicit typing?
There is. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but we'll see some examples later. A quick example here would be, this is a string, and this is an int. Okay, so this is more like original Bourne shell minus EQ minus NE. I don't know why they went that way. Again, it's hard to read and not what we expect these days, but at least it works and it's consistent within PowerShell. No big surprises here, equal, not equal. Any questions on this? I feel like we got a good pace going. Is everybody in the room happy with the pace? Anybody want me to slow down? This is the intro stuff till we get to the more exciting stuff later. And by exciting, you know, it's Saturday afternoon last session, so it's really not going to be that exciting. For each. This took a long time to get used to. Starting on line 2, we have an array. We talked about arrays. They have round parentheses instead of curly brackets. I defined it on line 2. Line number 4 is an old-fashioned C-style for loop. That works great. No surprises there. This is more of a C# LINQ style. It uses the PowerShell keyword for each dash object. $, underscore is the default variable. I saw that a lot in Perl. You'll also notice that I piped it. You don't see this so much in C#. This is more of a shell script thing. Here's my array, shove it into the for each loop. Here's the alternate syntax that doesn't use the pipe. No big surprise here either. For each is a synonym of for each dash object. If you look it up, there's some minor differences that I never understood, but someday when you're debugging something and it doesn't work, there's some minor difference there. Percent is an even more shorthand version of this. And this is what I see a lot in PowerShell. Some of the keywords have a magical punctuation mark that's different from everybody else, and it's really hard to read. And this would be hard to Google. You know, I have no idea what's going on here out of context. And that's kind of the theme of this talk, is how much information can I convey in an hour that's going to help you get started. When you do all your research and look things up about PowerShell, if you know these basics of the syntax, you'll be better off and you can do things faster. All right, in this case, we don't have an implicit variable, we have an explicit. This is just like C#. Nothing too exciting here about the C# version. So PowerShell is forgiving in the same way that JavaScript is infuriating in how forgiving it is, and C# is rather strict. PowerShell is a bit more forgiving. This is not an array, this is just a single string, but it worked fine. So I can do a for each loop against a string or an array, and PowerShell's perfectly happy, no complaints there. Now I want to do my for each on a hash table. C# always makes you do those annoying key value pair things, that awkward syntax that never makes sense to me. Oh, here it is. I'm going to clear out this console because it's getting too cluttered. I have to wait for it to do something. Okay. I declare my hash table on line 4. No big surprises. It uses the curly braces, equals semicolon syntax, which is still weird. I can do the key value pair, but man, it took me a long time to find this syntax in PowerShell. Nobody does it this way. This is essentially the C# version. Much easier. Just give me all the keys and loop through them. This is worth talking about. So we have a double quote here. That means that $key is going to get evaluated and printed down below. Parentheses means evaluate this in the middle of the string, and this is a hash table. I use this trick all the time, and earlier in one of the earlier slides when I showed hash tables for the first time, I kind of slipped that in there so that I could print what a hash table looks like. Any questions on this? This is the same thing using PowerShell shorthand. The shorthand is a gift and a curse. You can write very terse commands, but then the next person is not going to be able to understand them. I'm not advocating the abbreviated syntax, but you should learn it. So I'm kind of forcing you to learn it by showing a bunch of it. You can always use the words to have it make more sense. This is the same thing in one line. Give me all the keys. This means for each. This becomes the implicit variable. This is the hash lookup, and I evaluate it for this. And this is test 3. Yeah. So we see test 3 in the bottom, everything lines up. So all these are geared to be simple cases that work correctly. So here's what we talked about a little while ago. I want to display a hash table to a string. This is where I want to get to, number 8. To get there, I had to piece together a bunch of PowerShell. So here it is step by step. First, give me the keys. I guess backing up a step, write the numbers to the console so I can see what's going on, separate commands with a semicolon, give me all the keys to this simple hash table. This isn't DOS sort, this is PowerShell sort. For each item in the keys, first just write out the key, then write out, what is that, number 4? You can see I'm slowly building up the code here. Write the implicit variable equals, look it up in the hash table, repeat that same thing inside quotation marks so that write host is essentially echo. It adds extra spaces. So over here, I've got spaces. Here I tightened it up by wrapping it all in a string. You'll notice that I got rid of write host. PowerShell is okay with that. It just, I have a value, I'm going to spit it out. The last thing I did was I wrapped the whole thing in parentheses and called a PowerShell, join command. I'll come back to the join and split later. They obviously have a different syntax in C#, but I wanted to get, just show me the hash table. I can do it quickly in PowerShell, but man, that's pretty ugly. It works though. And if you're maintaining other people's PowerShell scripts, you're going to see a lot of stuff like this. 2 minutes. All right, first quiz. For the quiz, I need a volunteer. And to sweeten the pot, I have a $5 gift certificate to Saxby's. I would like to point out earlier in the day, David Patrick was running an intro to Azure and was handing out $80 gift cards that you can only use for Azure administrators. But this is a real gift card. So, any volunteers to run the quiz, talk through it? No volunteers? Okay. All right, front and center. I guess front to the side. What do you think? You can stay there. You can just yell it out. All right, first question. Sorry about that. Okay, a bunch of simple variables, no big deal. Create a hash table, no big deal. If I run this, it's not going to work the way that I want. I commented out because I don't want the syntax highlighter to give you any clues. Why doesn't line 8 do what I want it to do? Sure, that is incorrect. Just see if you're paying attention. Single quotes, that's the other problem. So I have my answers up here. Just like you said. The real answer is this syntax, no big surprise. All right, we're just getting warmed up here. Is this going to work correctly? I will promise you that I'm not an evil person who does very obscure tricks. So, you know, either it's going to work or it's not. I'm not going to slip in, you know, Greek letters or secret hacks. Correct. Trick question. It's perfectly fine. All right. There are all these different ways to add items to a hash table. Some of them are legit and some of them are fake. Why don't we do it line by line? Does this one look right? IntelliSense seems happy. How about the next one? It actually is going to fail. I don't know what IntelliSense is wrong. This is going to fail. So you got the right answer. Sorry about that. This was a weird one. I didn't think it was going to work, but it actually did work. So you're correct. So this is the classic C# style. Yep. This one is gonna, that's gonna fail. Yep. Let me run this to prove it. So these two are gonna give errors. And everything else worked as expected. Whoops. Let me clear my console because I think that's old junk from before. And everything worked as expected. Thank you very much, sir. All right, I'm going to move on. So where is similar to C# LINQ? I've got an array. Only show me the items that meet the criteria. All right, so line 2 gives me an array of the numbers 1 to 10. Only give me the items of the array that are greater than 8. You notice a couple things here. This variable is just sitting there. It's not a write line, it's just sitting there. And then I pipe it through where. So this feels more like a shell and less like a programming language. Where is a synonym of where object. The name where-object makes sense in the broader PowerShell naming scheme, but it's very annoying to type that all the time. And it has its own special abbreviation question mark. See, they're all the same thing. And you'll notice, just like before, 100 is not an array, but I can still do a for each on it. C# would hate that. I'm going to use this syntax for this demo just because I want you guys to get used to the difficult syntax. But I recommend when you're writing code, where is fine or where object. So null is always weird. So there is a keyword $null. There's empty string. Line number 4 has a blank array. For line number 5, I create a variable, then I undefine it. I removed it from PowerShell. Then I ran this. Okay, you know, guys know what this is. Here's an array of all those objects. % is for each, so I'm going to loop through all 4 of those guys and repeat it. $_ is the default variable, which is whatever part of the loop we're in. Display the value. This is similar enough to regular C#. Just give me the length of the loop variable. You'll notice there's a back tick to separate these things together. Bracket, string, bracket, colon, colon, empty. This drops down to C#. Anytime I want to call something in C# that's not available in PowerShell, I need a C# type in brackets, then a double colon, and I guess these are static variables that I can call on here. Here's another example. Is null or white space? All right, so I'm throwing a lot of stuff out here. What you'll notice is $D is undefined. PowerShell's perfectly fine with that. Just like JavaScript, something exists, it doesn't exist, it doesn't really care. There are subtleties here. Is it an empty string? Well, it either false, true, or I don't know what this is. The array, is the string empty for an array? Didn't crash, which was surprising. I'm going to jump through to how to deal with it. Because I passed in null, empty string, empty array, and this thing that got undefined. I'm not printing this thing. This was another case where the more I worried about it, it was not helpful. So whenever I have a bunch of complicated stuff going on, I always wrap it in this if statement. If it's not is null or white space, then go ahead and do whatever I'm going to do. I find this to be the safest way, because I don't care if it's an array, empty string, whatever it is, if it's not a valid string, don't bother me. And don't crash, don't throw an exception. Someone smarter than I could explain the subtleties and the differences between all these things, but when I'm writing a script, I don't care. I just need to get this code deployed, files copied, whatever it is. Any questions on this so far? Empty array. So in C#, if I called the true string type, if I called its method empty and I supplied an empty array, C# compiler wouldn't even allow it, I guess. But its value was, PowerShell didn't freak out, it just said, I don't know what it is.
Not true or false.
Yeah, this piece right here. So that's another, PowerShell is very forgiving, which is good and bad, because if something were to go wrong, you'd kind of want a compiler error for that. If I made that mistake and PowerShell doesn't tell me, I'm kind of annoyed. Here is another strange thing about PowerShell. Define a variable here. This variable is defined inside curly braces. This is perfectly fine. C# would hate this. This is a compiler error immediately. PowerShell says, that's fine, I don't care. Notice inside this variable, inside this function, I can refer to B. When B was defined up here, not only up here, but inside braces, it's fine, it doesn't care. So invoke-variable scope is just the name of the little function I made. So A is what I expect. B, I didn't really expect this, but apparently PowerShell doesn't really care about strict variable scoping as much. And inside here, this kind of drives me crazy because it's not like this is a class and these are well-defined class fields or members. There's no this syntax. It's just, okay, I'm fine with that. PowerShell is fine with that, I'm not. So my advice is, if you've got functions, don't rely on variables up here. I forget this a lot, and I never really know where things are scoped. So for good coding practice, make sure you don't have miscellaneous variables floating around. Otherwise, they'll get picked up by the functions down below if you use commonly named functions. Any questions on this?
Are you saying that no matter where you declare the variable, it's global?
Global to this file, but I never really know, to be honest. And I never trusted it, so don't do it. Which example? This one? That's a good question. I have no idea what's going to happen. How about that? Good call. I would not have expected that. All right, you saw me create a function earlier. No big surprise here. The syntax is mostly what you'd expect. I have my arguments here. I have my braces. I can refer to the arguments. No big surprise here. This is the biggest mistake that I always make in PowerShell. Line number 5 is wrong. Line number 7 is correct. When you call a function in PowerShell, you don't separate your values by commas because that implies that it's an array. I learned this, I make this mistake every time I come back to PowerShell after switching to something else because it's just so weird. No other programming language would do that. You'll notice when I define the function, of course I need the commas here, but when I call it, I don't. In fact, if you're looking closely to what's going on here, first time I called it, this is over here. First time I called it, it said, oh, this array is the first argument, which nobody expects. That's just plain weird. So the first argument is the 3 words, and B and C are empty. This is the right way of calling it to get the desired behavior. This is a better way to call it if you really need to pass an array. This A matches that A, so they are named arguments. There is something called splatting, which I don't know why anyone would ever do this, but create a hash table of all your arguments and then pass it to your function. If you're paying close attention, normally this passes in a hash table. This weird syntax matches all the parameters to the keys in your hash table. It's kind of weird. It's not used much. If you're trying to debug someone else's code and you're not paying close attention, this is really going to be mysterious. That meets with the objective I'm trying to do here today. What are the weird things that you're going to waste all day on, not realizing it's just a little dumb syntax thing in PowerShell? 27 minutes. All right, we're making good time here. Any questions on this? I have no idea. I think so. Yeah. Sometimes PowerShell is very forgiving and shows you what you want. Other times it falls back to the C# behavior of, oh, you want to know the type, don't you? Return has a lot of weird stuff going on here. So line number 2 is a simple function. This is what you'd expect. Line number 3 is what you'd expect. I wrapped it in parentheses so PowerShell wouldn't get confused, and we got the expected value. This function also is what you expect. I defined a variable, but I didn't return it. It's just sitting there. So when I call it down below, nothing happens. This is the behavior I expect. This is not the behavior I expect. I write a function, and instead of using the return keyword, it's just a string sitting there. It gets returned. This is very weird and drives me crazy. I have multiple occasions where I just have a string sitting there that's not being used. It gets returned. I don't let that sink in because this is very odd behavior that causes a lot of trouble for people who are new to PowerShell, or for people who use PowerShell for a while. It's very easy to make a mistake here. Huh. You know, I noticed that. I forgot it, and it worked. Apparently, you don't need it. Doesn't have any parameters. Like C#, you couldn't pull that off. Maybe there was some relation to the
No.
way it was written. I did it by accident and kind of realized, hey, it worked. Question in the back? Excellent question. No, it does not ignore the return keyword. If you look on lines 3 and 4, and then down below, they both worked. So it actually returned an array of ABC and XYZ. You can't quite tell from the syntax, but it's actually returning an array. To make things even worse, so line number 9 creates a temporary directory. Sorry, deletes a temporary directory if it exists. Line number 10 makes it. This isn't DOS mkdir. It's a shorthand for the fancy PowerShell version, but it basically works the same. It returns when I make a directory in PowerShell, it actually creates this object thing, so I can refer to it and call its properties and stuff. Most of the time, I don't care. If I have a string just sitting there, it gets returned. this returned a directory object. This function right here looks at first glance and makes it deletes a directory, creates it, and returns ABC. It actually returns a directory object. Where did it get TEF from? All right, let me restart this. So I purposely wrote this to be as weird as possible to highlight the fact. If you're not careful, you call a command, it returns an object, it gets output into this return output pipeline stream. Oh, okay. So this is the end of, so return2 returned two things, even though it wasn't obvious it did. Let me throw this out here. This is PowerShell syntax to the Linux equivalent of redirect to dev null. This will make that particular problem go away. It'll run the script. But ignore the output and only return ABC. Take that out. This is even weirder. Write output and write host are different. Write host is for console debugging. Take a string, dump it to the output. Write output officially writes it to the output stream. PowerShell is designed to do shell piping, always taking inputs and outputs. So whether you return it or it's just a string sitting there or you explicitly call write output, those are the things that are returned. It actually does make sense. When I invoke this, it writes DEF to the console, which is right here, but that truly returns ABC, which is attached to write output. All right, 20 minutes. If you need to return an array, there's some weird behavior. PowerShell thinks it's being very helpful. If you're returning an array of one item, it returns a string. First of all, let's do the simple case. Return an array. This returns an array. This is exactly what I expect. If I'm going to return an array containing one item, PowerShell says, no thanks, I'll just make it a string and not tell you. This was so confusing for me when I'm trying to debug things. I have an array, works great, works great. It happens to be an array with one item, boom, it becomes a string and my code breaks. It's just PowerShell trying to be helpful. So return an array of the letter A and return the letter A behave the same. This syntax forces the issue. You put a comma, a stray comma before your array, and then it behaves correctly. You put a stray comma before a big array, it still works correctly. I don't know, it's just weird. All right, I'm not going to talk, we'll get back to how functions are defined. I do want to focus on this thing called process. Process will repeat the block of code for each line of the input. These are my function parameters. Instead of living here, for some weird reason I don't understand, PowerShell has a param syntax. Inside the body of your function, you redefined all your parameters. In C#, you've seen the syntax for fancy attributes on your arguments. To use them in PowerShell, you have to move your command line, your function arguments into this param block. It's just weird. I don't know why. It took me a while to get used to it. This special keyword says, this is my input. And I'll jump down here and say, if I feed a string or an array into my function I just wrote, this is the syntax for it. I can call it explicitly by name, or I can do the pipeline out, use it through a pipeline. This is going to take some explaining. First one worked great. Just call it by explicit parameter name. I can pass in a single string or an array because PowerShell's forgiving. C# would never let me do that. I can pipe it a string or an array into it, and because I use this special keyword up here, value from pipeline, it knows how to handle it. This is a new line character. This is a PowerShell command called save content. Dump whatever I just did into a temp file. GC is get content. Read the input from a text file and turn it into kind of an array or a pipeline, so each line gets treated separately. So when I feed this text file, GC get content of my quick brown fox into here, it worked. Test 4 worked great. Test 4 worked great. Test 5 worked great. Oh, the point of my function is I put the brackets and I turn it to uppercase. This is just to prove that the function's working. This fails. I pass in a string delimited by new lines directly. Nope, it's just one parameter. It's not multiple lines of data. It's just weird PowerShell behavior that I can't really explain. If you use the PowerShell functions rather than trying to trick it, then it behaves better. Any questions on this? I can't explain why. I'm just pointing out that this is how it behaves. Yes. Value from pipeline in this syntax applying to this thing called myInput allows me to use this syntax. If I took off value from pipeline, this would work and this would fail. Any other questions on this? All right, let's talk more about this function parameters. For reasons I don't understand, instead of putting all your functions here, like normal, you take them out, and as you noticed, I even took out the parentheses, and I put them in this parameter block. Commandlet binding is one of these PowerShell magical things that you just need sometimes to make it work. I don't really know what it does. We talked about this already, value from pipeline. I added mandatory, which I think is self-explanatory. Here they're explicitly typed as string. This is mandatory. In addition to fruit, I can do the letter F. So if I'm building Unix-style tools where I have command line arguments, it makes things easier. Okay, no surprises here. It works as expected. You'll notice I had a default value for num, so I didn't specify it. It worked great. I can pipe things to the input. I can use the alias, and I can explicitly name it. So I'm just stress testing the different param options. Any questions on this? PowerShell has a specific way of documenting functions. In C#, you have, was it ///, and it autofills all that stuff. I won't go into the details, but it will be good for you if you're going to write code that other people are going to use and maintain. Look up the specifics of this. These commands will help you. I can't remember the name of the command. From the command line PowerShell, I can say, give me all the commands that start with, let me clear this out. Because I wrote fancy help contents, all of these different ways will give me the help. Lots of help, a little bit of help, /?, $?. I didn't have to explicitly define that. I just got that for free. This is for when I can't remember the name of the command, get command. This is when I want the help for that particular command. Oh, it doesn't work from PowerShell within Visual Studio Code actually doesn't give me the help correctly. This looks pretty. For some reason, when I ran the code above, it was ugly, but it works here. And this is an alternate syntax. All right, time for the next quiz. I need a volunteer. This time we got a choice of Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, $5 card. Any volunteers to talk through this? You get the card for trying. All right, in the back. What'll it be, Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts? Excellent. What is wrong with line number 1? I made some mistakes on purpose. Question number 1, I mean. I think it works either way. So I don't think it's wrong. It's an alternate syntax. I'll give you a hint. The problem is on line 3. Line 6 is written correctly. Line 3 is written wrong. Missing the commas, that's right. Question number 2. What was your name in the back? Eric. Eric. What will this return? Question number 2. Correct. How do I ask PowerShell, show me all the functions that start with quiz 2 and end in C? I can run this now. All right, so question 1, that's the output that you correctly predicted. Do you remember the keyword for that? In PowerShell, I can't remember the name of the function. It was down here, get command. Let me make sure it works. Get command, quiz star C. Yep. Number 4 is a toughie. What is wrong with number 4? This is the output it created, which is not what I wanted. The dash before the A is valid. The reason this is a challenge question is because I made this mistake by accident, and it took me like an hour to figure out why that syntax was wrong, so I left it in as a bonus question. Take the equal sign out. All right, it's a group effort, so Eric still gets his Dunkin' Donuts card. Could you pass this back to him, please? Join is the keyword to join arrays. Split, it works similar to C#, but in the shell syntax. I get confused because I want to take something and then pipe it through join, but it's not how it works. It's the minus join keyword, not pipe join. Split supports regular expressions just like C#. Everybody okay with this? This is pretty straightforward. Like and match, I can put this in the middle. Like is simple regex, like das star.txt. Match is a full-on regex with all the C# regular expression, Perl syntax stuff baked into it as well. Here you'll notice that well, this is just a comment. The escape character is a backslash instead of a backtick because we're passing it. That's PowerShell is handing it off to C# to do the work. That I find confusing. See if this works. Okay, so this works as expected. That was the wrong word. And I just closed Visual Studio Code. Whatever the keystroke is to close a window or close the app, I keep doing the wrong one. Replace is kind of weird. What throws me off is this comma. Every time you call a function, you're not supposed to use the commas. But If you call this syntax, you need them. I don't know. That really threw me for a loop. I did it again. Any questions on replace, like, match, join, split? Those are pretty straightforward. We have time for quiz 3. All right, so we're down less the Starbucks. I'll give you a hint. There is a bonus quiz at the end. Double the value. Any volunteers for quiz number 3, $5 Starbucks. I'm going to have to pick somebody if we don't have any volunteers. Volunteer there. What's your name? Anuj? Okay, what's wrong with number 1? Correct. Number 2. So give me an array of a.text, b.text, c.doc. Give me everything at star.txt. That's the objective. Which of these are going to work and which of these are going to fail? Let's start with the first one. Is this going to give me the desired behavior? Correct. This one will work fine. This is full-on C# regex. Is this going to work? This one's going to fail. I'll show you why in a minute. Contains. Is contains going to work? Contains is for arrays. I always make this mistake because these words are so similar. Contains, if I go back to arrays up top, is something contained in an array as opposed to is it contained in a substring? That confuses me a lot. So this one is not going to work. Any thoughts on similar to? It's not going to work because I just made it up. All right, so I'll leave that one off. Let me comment these ones out for now so I don't. All right, so the reason it failed was because for a true C# regex, it's supposed to be okay, so this one works. Can you read that in the back? Like works, match doesn't because it really needs a more sophisticated regex. You have to put a slash before the dot, and you can't just use regular star, you need a dot before the star. Contains is for something that's in an array. All right, next up, what is wrong with this? Correct, it's a team effort, just missing the dash before the like. All right, this is subtle. This is another thing that I found by mistake as I was writing these samples. It didn't behave the way I wanted it to, so I turned it into a bonus question. Let me go ahead and run it. I'm going to comment out this match because it has the wrong syntax. Let me clear my buffer because I'm getting confused. Okay, so this worked okay. This did nothing. I'll go ahead and tell you what the answer is. Inside a for each loop, if you update the default variable, it gets thrown away. This actually makes more sense if I said right host. You thinking? What's going on? I might have done it wrong. Okay, this time it worked. Wow, it didn't do it all what I wanted. So right host was kind enough to literally do what I told it to, not what I meant. Right host is like echo, so it took dash replace and literally pushed it out to the console, which is not what I wanted. And try this one more time. This time it worked correctly. If I update this variable, it gets thrown away, so that's useless. If I just leave a variable in a loop and do nothing with it, it gets returned. All right, I think we're running low on time. So, close it again. I'll show one example. All right, we're going to find all files in a folder. The first thing I do is create a temporary directory, not very exciting. I go to my temp path, create a GUID, that's just the name of my folder. I make the directory, I create some dummy text files. Next question is, give me a list of everything star.txt that's more than 20 bytes. This got a little bit weird because by default, they turn out to be UTF-16 with beginning markers in them. So all the byte counts were not what I expected. First thing I have to do is get child item. This is give me a list of all the files from this directory. This is pretty well behaved, it makes sense. I looped through everything using a for each loop. Each file object this is pretty close to C#. It might be the same, one of those file IO objects. If the length is greater than 20, then go ahead and write it. Here's the same thing the way a grumpy PowerShell sysadmin would write it. GCI is the abbreviation for get child item. Apparently -path is optional. I can just get all the files in here. Filter stays the same. This is a where clause. So take that stream, only give me items where the default variable, which is a file object of some C# type, where the length is greater than 20. This is a for each loop. So print out the name equals whatever, length equals whatever. They're in double quotes. This evaluates those expressions so it looks good in the string. This is horrible code. Hopefully I've never written any code as ugly as this. But this is an example together. There's no gift certificate behind this one. But yeah, if you're dealing with someone else's PowerShell scripts, you'll see stuff like this, or you'll see online examples. And even if you tried to figure this out by Googling it, like Google question mark %, like how would you even get started? All right, we're running out of time, so we've got a couple more things here. How do you want to do the bonus quiz? All right, this one I need a volunteer for, but I'm going to request absolute silence. Is it in here? I even took it out of the slide deck. All right. Now don't blurt out the answer. I didn't give this out. Anuj? Thank you very much. All right, for this one, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand for the Wawa $10 gift certificate. It's nothing too esoteric, but it is a bonus question. I'll give you another minute, but after that, I'll run the code, and you can see what the output is. And then the first person to name it gets the gift certificate. No. Good guess, though. In the back with the blue shirt? Okay. Yes, with the black shirt? No, you're in the right ballpark. Yes, in the blue shirt? Not quite. Getting closer. In the back? I think, yeah. Can you rephrase that more simply? I'll run the code. I think you've got it. I think we're saying the same thing. Not perfect squares. Remember to raise your hand if you want to get the gift certificate. Okay, well, you did blur it out first. Even though I said raise your hand, I'll still give it to you. Yes, they're the prime numbers. So a couple tricks on the algorithm here. This is modulo. This is for each. How confusing is that? This gives me an array of all the numbers 1 to 100. This is a where clause. Start with the number. Is it prime? It's prime by default. Give me the square root. Go from 2 to whatever the square root is. And if the modulo matches, then it is not prime. If it is prime, then this by default prints it out. Join up the results in a comma. So this was the bonus question, because hopefully no one has to actually debug code like this. But I've seen some scary things in my life, and I thought this would be a fun exercise. So I've got about 10 more slides that I'm not going to do because it's Saturday and we've only got a few minutes left. Anybody who's interested, let me put up my final notes here. Open up to questions. Let me first just remember how to show my windows. Don't close. There it is. Everything's up on GitHub if you have any questions. My name is Brian. I work for Eigenx Consulting. I am looking for a C# architect for a Windows developer architect for a gig that's going to last a couple months. Come up and talk to me if you might be interested. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn, reach out to me, shoot me questions. Any questions about the presentation today? Thank you. So thank you very much. Can I ask somebody to take my picture just so I can convince my boss why I had to buy all those gift certificates? Any volunteers to take my picture? Oh, let me put up. Yeah, I'm serious. I'm not paying for those. I expense that. Let me put up the bonus question. No, I was serious. All right, well, thank you very much. And if anybody can, I'll do a selfie then to prove that people actually showed up. You laugh, but it's happened to me. This is going to be a difficult selfie. Any other questions while I'm... What's that? No, that's okay. All right, thank you. Any other PowerShell questions? Thank you all for coming.